intro video.
Nah.
Here, are we on? I hope we're on.
I think
Yes,
so.
we are
Yay!
live, my friend. Woo! Okay.
Yay! Woohoo!
Happy holidays. Happy New Year. All the things. Hope everyone is having a great and restful period right now. So I am LT, Latanya Reese Miles, and I'm here today joined by my buddy, my bestie, my partner, and so many different things. My goodness. Dr. Heather Adams, and today we are talking about this year's 2024 nominees for the Catalyst Awards. Woo!
Woo! Yeah!
Okay, before well, before we do that,
Such we're dorks, man.
let me Dorks
We're
United.
enthusiastic. We're
Dorks
very
United.
enthusiastic.
Oh my gosh. But let me first, Heather, let me talk a little bit about the Catalyst Awards because
Do
this
it.
is year 5. I can't believe it already. We are going into our 5th year of basically accolades of mass media and pop culture phenomenon that specifically highlight and amplify the first generation college non-traditional learner experience. So that could be TV shows, podcasts, Instagram accounts, young adult fiction, novels, but it is not research and scholarship. Nope, that's not what this is all about. This is about embracing our love for pop culture and also acknowledging the significance of pop culture and its influence on us. So the awards were started 5 years ago as an outgrowth of two things. First Gen and Juice on Instagram, shout out, woo, woo, woo.
Yeah.
And
You
also
got to follow it right now if you're not.
follow First Gen and Juice. Also, the Empowering First Generation College Students Facebook group. So
Community.
great communities coming together to, you know, we often ask ourselves, what are some good books out there about first gens, or what TV shows can I show my students or my class or what have you? And now we have grown so much so that the Catalyst Awards are now under a parent company called My Tribe Media that Heather and I have co-founded. Yay!
Yay!
And we are also, the awards are also sponsored by Addie Health, and the future is looking so bright. So if anyone else wants to sponsor us, we're here for it as well.
Yeah.
Okay,
Let us know. We'd
one
love
more
to
thing.
partner.
One more thing before I toss this over to you, Heather. I just want to
Yeah.
say about the awards and what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the nominees just at a high level. We're not going to get into every single category, but we do want to say that the awards are meant to amplify untold stories. Like, so what are we want to acknowledge that the first generation college experience is not a monolith. There's so many intersections, and what are some of the things that we look for both in terms of nominees and in terms of winners. So being a founder, and I actually do not judge. I have a partner, Stephanie, who's not here with us today, but we have put together the ballot. Heather, you have been a 4-time judge. You are an OG. So
Okay. Okay.
well, introduce yourself and just like, what are some of when you think about the past 4 years, what comes to mind for you about the Catalyst Awards?
I love that. So I am a transfer and an adult learner, right? I went back to school at 37. And I've worked with thousands of transfer students, community college students, uh, thousands of whom are first generation college students, right? And I'm inspired by that every single day. And so early on, when we first started this, what I loved about being a judge is that I got to see those untold stories every day with the students that I worked with, right? I was not seeing them reflected in television, film, books, all of that, right?
Mm.
So that was the thing that was really cool to me about initially doing those early years, like 2020, where I'd be like, oh my gosh, yes, people are writing about what I'm actually, one, either lived. I'm not a first generation college student, but I've worked with so many that I get to see those stories all the time, and they weren't being told. So that I think was the initial thing that just it was really inspiring to me in the early years of being a judge, and now it's morphed into um, seeing that expand in multiple ways, because you even though there were these untold stories, there's also a themes. There's told stories too. We'll talk about that, I
Ooh,
think,
told
right?
stories. Look at
There's
you making
told
up
stories.
stuff on the fly.
Thank you. There are told first gen stories, right? And those are first gen stories. I love in these last couple of years that
Yeah.
is this sort of nuance of watching something and then almost having a moment of realization of like, oh my gosh, this is a first gen story, or this is
Yeah.
an adult learner story or transfer,
Yeah.
where you're not even thinking about it. You're watching, I don't know, an action adventure thing or a horror movie or something that's not, a typical, like, here's how it happened,
Hmm.
or here are the issues, or here are the challenges. You know how we talk
Yeah.
about it a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and I think you said it's not about research, and it's not, but what's really interesting is you start to see some trends and some themes
Yeah.
that I am not seeing anybody research, and I'm not seeing anybody actually study. And I think that's been a really interesting thing as a judge, because in my day job, I consult and I do a lot of research and I do national work on community college transfer. And it inspires me to see areas and gaps that we're not looking at as researchers and as advocates.
Oh, okay. Well, we're about to get into it because we should
Yeah.
talk about what some of those gaps are.
Let's do that. So I wanted to, because it has morphed and really evolved over the years.
Mhm.
We're in as we head into 2025, and we're kind of looking forward at some of the important aspects of the first gen college experience. I'm wondering, what are you looking for that you think should be highlighted in that storytelling, right? Are there
Yeah.
certain themes, are there certain dynamics that are standing out to you, or that you're not seeing, that could be really interesting to explore for those that are thinking of nominating or writing in the future for future awards?
Yeah, I first of all, you blow my mind about the told and untold story, so I'm still stuck on that. I think some of the common told stories are what you and I would often refer to as like the struggle narrative or like bootstraps narrative, which is like someone who's come from really, really poor or modest means, and where they always end up at Harvard, right? Or
Oh,
Stanford, or Stanford. Oh my
highly
God.
selective institution. Woo! I mean, we love y'all. We
Yeah.
love you, highly selective institutions. However, that is not the only story.
That is not the only story. So I think that's the common one. I
Yep.
think what sort of piques my interest are probably things like more focus on intersectionality, so first gen plus. So and that could be race and ethnicity, that could be sexuality or sexual orientation, it could be student athletes, but and not just that a body holds those identities, but how those things matter to being first gen. So what does it mean, for example, to be a student athlete who also is first gen? And so we saw that, and we're going to go into trends, but
Mhm.
like a couple years ago, the Netflix series, why am I totally blanking right now? Which here is one of them, but
Right.
Last
Last
Chance
chance
You.
you. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh
oh
my
my
god.
gosh, love
Last
it,
chance you.
love it.
I love it
Multiple
so much.
multiple Catalyst Award
Yep.
nominee and a winner, but
Yep.
like how those things matter. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with regard to FAFSA, right? Because so many people
Ah.
talked about financial aid. And
Mhm.
last year's Catalyst Award winner for Best Scripted TV Show was Reservation Dogs, which is amazing. And if y'all aren't watching, please go
Mm.
back. It's only 3 seasons, but there was a really pivotal scene in one of the episodes that is about financial aid, and I just think it really like leans into this young woman being first in her family to go to college and that tension of having to ask a parent to fill out the FAFSA. I would be it'd be interesting to see how that plays out, but I would love to see more stories about that. How about you?
Well, I was just thinking, and I just thought of all FAFSA has been in the news so much, right? Because of all the changes in the last year or two. So that will be fascinating to see.
It'll be
Does that
interesting.
Yeah, does that conversation change? And then
Mhm.
this is I just wanted to, you just wrote a memoir called Smart Girl, that is in pre-sales now. And what I was thinking of when you were talking is, yeah, there you go. See the basketball. Um, you were talking about financial challenges, cultural adjustment, family dynamics, academic pressure. I would say every single one of those is in your memoir about,
Oh.
very
Mm.
specifically about, in a way, in a new way, in a way that's not, um, in a way that's really focused on that academic journey that you wanted to focus on, and how the intersection of being a scholar and being first gen and being all of these other things work. So anyway, as you were talking, I just wanted
Yeah.
to note that I noticed
Oh,
all of
well,
those
thank
in your
you.
book. Yeah.
Well,
But
another thing that came up this past year, because on this podcast, I
mm,
hosted a really fun conversation about animated villain from the comics, Doctor Doom. And one of the things that I was on with some really great friends, and we talked about Doctor Doom having this first gen story, and he's a villain, and we love that, right? So the
yes.
complexities, right? So it doesn't have to be like the innocent first gen person that's making their way through. That's the told story. I think just more like I wrote this down, like more nuances, more complexities,
Mm,
different genres. You mentioned horror and
mm.
gothic, but like the first gen, oh, our favorite show that you introduced me to, Industry.
Industry. I was just gonna
Industry,
say it's
amazing.
dark.
It's
It's
dark, y'all.
awful people. I mean, it is like it's drugs and sex and meanness,
Right.
but it is so interwoven with
Hmm.
these themes of where the characters come from and how they've gotten themselves into the situations they are and become the people they are.
Yes.
I loved that. I remember calling you the moment I was like, "Oh my gosh, guess what?" And I think you started watching it that day, and you
I
were
think
like,
I
"This
did.
is dark,"
I
and I was like, "I know, but guess what?
we should have saved this. Like, we should make
Well,
some screenshots of what
we
I
should
was.
have, because
Yeah.
yeah, that was yeah.
So I
Well,
think. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say in those themes, you were asking about kind of what qualities I've looked for. I mean, I think it's that. It's like what is something that I know to be an existing story, but that I haven't seen in pop culture, in media, in mainstream media, um, or a voice I just haven't heard, right? What's the voice I haven't heard yet? And I think, well, I kind of want to get to going back to your conversation or your question about trends. I, you know, I think you noted that back in 2020 when you started, there were a lot more scripted programs that were and that were nominated, but some of those shows aren't on the air right now, right? And
Hmm.
you were thinking like, and I think what it is that we're looking at podcasts now, we're looking at Instagram accounts and YouTube accounts now, because we actually have the ability now to just pick up this and tell our
Yes.
story.
Yes. Right.
Right? And I think that's maybe it's freed people a little bit. You're not reliant on Hollywood and reliant on a producer or a whole production company to decide that this is a worthy story. Um, you can actually sit down and start sharing and talking and interviewing and focusing on what it is that you find interesting or that your story is.
I
And I
think
think that's
that's.
one trend. Mhm.
Well, no, I was gonna say, I think that's so important, this sort of like DIY movement. And I just want to say for folks that are listening, if Heather mentioned this already, like if you are looking for topics to study, the things we're talking about now are critical, like mass media and representation, but also alternative way so-called alternative ways in which people are telling their story. So let's use memoir, you mentioned that already, as an example, and going like a traditional published route. Like there's a hidden curriculum to all these things. Like how do you get your memoir published at a big press? So you have to have connections, you have to have a platform already. But what if you
Mhm.
don't? Or what if you want to go a different route? Like a previous nominee, Erica Alfaro, which whose book has sold thousands and thousands of copies, and she's done it in a non-traditional way. When we look at some of the nominees for memoir this year, um, all four, yeah, four of them. So we've got No Son of Mine by Jonathan
Mm.
Corcoran, Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant by Curtis Chin, First in the Family, look right there in the title, Jessica Hop, and then The World I See by Fei Fei Li.
Mm.
Those four this year are what we might consider sort of traditional memoirs, but that's not necessarily what we've seen in the past. And maybe
Mhm.
that'll be something that we will see going forward. But what I do appreciate about these particular memoirs is like the two of the authors identify as Asian or Asian American.
Oh, yeah.
No Son of Mine is focused on rural LGBTQ identity, so still the diversity is there. So I'm loving
Yeah.
those.
Also, young adult fiction. That I'm not mistaken, right? That was right because there wasn't a lot in 2020. I'm
Mm-mm,
pretty sure. Let me look at the categories. Like, I don't even think that was a category.
it wasn't.
This year, there were 3 or 4.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
actually in last year there were more.
Oh,
But
yeah. I
we are
remember.
seeing, so if folks are looking for some really diverse representation of the first gen experience, check out young adult writers in fiction. This year's nominees include Dear Wendy, Study Break, and A Whole Song and Dance. All the main characters are people of color, first gen and people of color. So a definite genre to pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Heather, we gotta talk about
Oh,
podcasts and Instagram accounts, and let's
yes.
spend a little bit of time on
Okay.
this. Okay,
Okay.
first let's start with podcasts
Yes.
because I one of the things I've noticed is, like you mentioned before, a growing trend. Like there's
Mhm.
so many podcasts now about the first gen experience. So shout out to all of those. But let's talk about what what do we I could talk about what we look for in a nominee, but I want to talk about what you
Yeah.
look for in a judge. So
Okay.
I, it was so funny because we're at a point now where we have like tropes, right? Okay, so
Mhm.
English major speaking. um, it's like
What does trope mean, actually? Can I ask you?
certain
Can I ask you?
common themes that you come to expect
Yeah.
in genre, right? And so
Mhm.
when we think of some common tropes in or common ways of being
Narrative.
for
Mhm.
first gen podcasts, what's been typical right now is there's like someone who identifies as first gen and they interview folks who also identify as first gen, and there's like they tell their story.
Yeah.
So that is really important. Our first winner in that category was Eve Hudson's amazing, like one of the yes,
Oh.
the first gen lounge. A lot of
Yep.
people imitated her.
Yep.
Now that's becoming more common. And so for the nominees for this year, which include the competition, which is about young women who are involved in a national scholarship competition, and some
Mhm.
of them were first gen. You at UCA, which is University of Central Arkansas, and
Yep.
Shockers Learning Out Loud, they actually don't fall in that traditional sort of
Yep.
device storytelling, and so that was one of the reasons why they were nominated. But
I love
what makes a good podcast in your estimation for Catalyst Awards?
I
A
think
strong, not good. They're all good.
they're
What
all
makes it
really good,
distinctive?
yeah.
Distinctive.
I think it's what you just were getting to is in fact, it's weird, this is an Instagram thing, but I'm thinking of the MD Instagram account from last year.
Foods and medicine.
Foods and medicine, right.
That's who won last year.
What I love about that is while it's it's finding a new lens to look at things from and to share the information from, right? It's like a kaleidoscope. It's like it's like you
Mhm.
shifted kind of the way that you were looking at it, and were able to kind of follow a story or follow um an experience, a first gen experience in a new way. Now I know that's not a YouTube or a podcast
Okay.
example,
Mhm.
but that's what I look for as a judge when I'm listening is, um, what's the kind of what's the lens that this is coming from, right?
Okay.
Who's telling the story and how are they telling it? And then what are the interwoven complexities that might move us in a way that we haven't seen before or we didn't know was a issue, challenge, experience within that first gen story.
Okay.
I think of like transfer, right? We never talk about community college.
Mm,
We don't, like I'm not seeing those, or if we do, it's usually like, you know, it's not talked about, but that's a huge, I mean, something like 60% or
yes.
plus community college students
Our first
um,
gen.
are first gen.
Hmm.
But I mean, do you know? And I mean, yeah, I can think of the TV show Community or whatever, but like they didn't talk about that. That wasn't part of like what was the narrative of it. It was like the kind of old trope, as you would say, of like community college is for the people who didn't make it the first time. It's like a second chance. It's like, dude, 40 million people go to community college. Like it's not it's a first chance for a lot of people. It's a second 20th chance for a lot of people. It's like it's there's that nuance to it.
Okay.
And so I think that's what
So
really
we're looking for
interested me.
nuance, people.
Yeah, nuance, but also new ways of telling stories, right? I think we've shifted from the interview style to like, what's the, what's the serial we can do? Like what's the different type of story
Mm,
podcast telling tactic,
yes.
genre way of doing it, right? And so
Yeah.
that's another way. And yeah, so I think those are the things that stood out to me in the
Yeah.
last couple of years.
Let me talk a little bit about these nominees again. But let
Okay.
me start with you at UCA. So first, and also Shockers Learning Out Loud. So what
Yeah.
those two have in common, number one, those are public regional institutions. So shout out to University of Central Arkansas and Wichita State, amazing first gen forward institutions as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
And one of the things I'll say about the specific episode that was nominated for from you and at UCA. So it was called We Were Freshmen Too, and
Uh-huh.
the hosts is a staff member and a student who both were first gen, and they are interviewing the university president and the campus vice president of student affairs, and it's just a casual conversation. It's not overly polished. There's no like music in the background.
Mhm.
It's very sort of authentic storytelling. And the VP of Student Affairs also identified as first gen. And I just love how um the the like the barriers are sort of broken down, I would argue that this is the type of podcast that most students should listen to going to like a traditional 4-year school as part of orientation. What how you can have a conversation with your campus president and VP, and it's not.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly, that's what I'm saying. Like they were like asking them about how did you choose your major and about being in Greek life when they were freshmen. It was so good. So it
Nice.
was like listening to a warm hug. So you at UCA was distinctive in that way, and then also
Also,
shockers.
what I loved about that one, sorry to interrupt, but I love
Mhm.
that it was also the student and the admin point of view, right? So, and
Yes.
that's sort of what I'm talking about is like, what lens am I coming from? And can I come from multiple lenses? Right there in that room, you got, a high level admin as the president and a VP. You had probably like the student services person
Mhm,
who was also
mhm.
first gen who had a first gen but like now they're first gen professionals, right?
Professional.
They're not students.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
then you have the students. So you've got that nuance of questioning that can happen from the folks that are learning the questions as they go and the folks who've already learned the questions to ask or what they, what that experience was. So I like those nuances too.
And what I like, and they've got that, it has an identity. They're talking about you at UCA and what that's like, but then it becomes universal at the same time. And so I
Yeah.
think that's a good lesson, or good tip for anyone. Like, find your lane, and if you can lean
Mm,
into your lane, it actually will resonate, right? You don't have to do all things for all people. And then
yeah.
similarly for Shockers Learning Out Loud is specifically for adult learners at Wichita State. and many of those adult learners also are first gen, but they just this like this is what we do, this is what we're talking about, and you just get that richness that you were talking about, right? Like you said, some of the things, the stories you may have been hearing about yourself, but you weren't seeing anywhere else. Well, Shockers Learning Out Loud does that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah,
Yay.
that's exactly it. It's funny. It's funny because I was reflecting back as you were thinking. I was thinking of all the little like areas and niches that folks, like at UCLA when we were there, there'd be like the transfer, business majors that had their own like thing, and I was like, oh, that's kind of what
Yes.
we're talking about is like the
Yes.
communities within the communities and the
Commu-
stories within the story.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well, let's
love
talk
that.
about Instagram accounts because
Okay.
Instagram. Well, did you want to go
No,
say
no,
more?
let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do it. Go for
Well,
it.
so one of the things that we want to say, you kind of you opened the door to this when you talked about last year's winner, which was foods and medicine, and
Mhm.
I'll share who the nominees are right now. But we just want to remind folks that Instagram itself is a form of storytelling,
Mhm.
and that's the goal of these awards is storytelling, like above all things. Well, yes, first gens and then storytelling. So let me say who these nominees are. First of all, two-time nominee, UC San Francisco. That is a completely graduate professional school institution. So their Instagram account was nominated. They were nominated last year. First Gen Biola, the first time is a first time nominee. Doctora Myra, or becoming a doctora. Sorry about that. She was nominated this year, and the Astro Stud as well. So I just want to talk again, get your perspective. You've been a four-time judge.
Mhm.
What is it about Instagram that's unique and special?
Well, I think with Instagram, different than like a podcast or YouTube, it's like
Yes.
in the moment. It's so fresh. It's like
Mm,
day. It's like, what's my day?
mm,
What's my like, what's happening between class or what's happening like at home. It's like right now. And that I love because I was a transfer student, but it was a while ago, right? So like I want to know kind of what's happening right now with somebody in their experience. So I think Instagram lends itself to that, right? Because it's a moment in time and it's fast and stories and they disappear and all those things. Um, and it also you need to be concise, right? It's not
ooh,
Twitter where it's 120 character, 140 characters or whatever. But it's similar in the sense that, do you have about 60 seconds or you have a little time? You have like, you can't do 9 minutes of a video and then like make the story happen. You could, I guess, but like in order to do that, you would need to be super specific, super concise, and super intentional about what it is that you're saying. And so I like Instagram for that too, because it really makes you synthesize exactly what it is you mean to say and how you're saying it. And it's pretty clear right away if you say it effectively or not,
mm-hmm.
because you get a reaction or you don't, or you get, people, it resonates with people or it doesn't. Um, Also, it's visual. You don't have to just do a like interview like
Exactly.
right. It's like
Yes.
there's ways to pull it in. Also, I don't know about you. You know me really well, but my brain is like. Brrr. And so what I like about Instagram is like there's like a thing that pops up and there's a thing moving over here and then there's a voiceover and there's music, and so you get to like that kaleidoscope again. You get to tell a story in a way that's not a play, right? It's not like a set
Mm.
stage of like
Ooh,
right. You can see it from the back, you can see it from the top, you can see it from all over, and it has a playlist, right? Like so it's just it gives it that richness and that completeness, but it also gives you this different angle that you can tell it to, or and specificity.
yeah,
I think that's what really works to me in the Instagram stuff is like, what is the exact thing that you like? What's your thing,
yeah.
right? When I nominate Instagram accounts, I'm thinking of that too. It's always like, oh my God, this is fresh. This is cool. I've never seen like this interaction or this um, intersection before. Or if I have, I love that this person is putting their spin on it and their little kind of unique, idiosyncratic opinion point of view towards it.
Yeah. You just perfectly described the four nominees, just in terms of what I what I would say for those in particular is how they maximized Instagram and its features. What
Mhm.
I've seen, I think you might agree. Again, there's so many Instagram accounts out there that sort of extension of first gen programs, and there's a lot of value to that. In many ways, those accounts are like taking what's in a physical space and putting it online, and that's great. But I would say what would make a catalyst nominee is just like you were saying, is how do you use the poll, like all the features of an IG account, create the short videos, and really acknowledge the fact that it's not a podcast, it's not a book, it's not a memoir. They're really engaging with that particular mode. And so I think that's I think that's probably characteristic of most of the nominees is how is someone, let's say, even a memoir, what are they doing in the memoir genre that is unique and specific? Go ahead.
Oh, no, I love that. Yeah,
Oh,
like,
okay.
are they no, no, I was just that was just, resonating because I was thinking, like, there's another book I'm reading, right now, and it's, like, occasionally it's, in poem form, and occasionally it's in dialogue form, and occasionally it's in, like, a traditional narrative form, but I like even and it's a memoir, and I like the idea that it's all kind of twisted up into these different because we don't all write the same way.
Right.
It's kinda like the very first time I read an E. E. Cummings poem. I don't know if you know who E. E. Cummings is as a poet, but as
Uh,
an English major, you probably do. Okay. I didn't wanna make I didn't,
that's right. Don't make
but
assumptions. Don't make
I
assumptions.
won't, but if
Okay.
anybody hasn't who's listening, what's
That's right.
really cool about he doesn't use punctuation the same way. Like, I remember as a kid, the first time I saw an E. E. Cummings poem because I was like, "Well, he doesn't do all the grammar stuff,
Mhm,
like, why do
mhm,
I have to diagram, a
mhm.
sentence or whatever?" I just thought it was so cool that you could tell a story in the way that your brain thinks or works and so yeah, even in writing form you can do that, but Instagram just lends itself to that creativity in a more rich way because you've got so many tools.
Yeah, yeah. So we look forward to seeing even more creativity. Heather, I want to talk a little bit though about two nominees that started off on social media accounts. They started off
Okay.
as part of on Instagram and podcasts, and that's this year's nominees for nonfiction.
Mhm.
So one is Gigi's book. Shout out to Gigi, Cultura y Cash, or Culture and Cash, which is about the advice she wished she had had as a first gen in terms of
Mm.
finances. This is a trend that shout out to Stephanie Youngblood
Yep.
who has pointed this out. And then so Gigi started off as a IG account, and that grew into a whole book platform.
Mm.
And then Yvette Martinez Vu, um, her podcast on an Instagram account on grad school femtoring, also a nominee, prior nominee, is now nominated for a book. It's called Is Grad School for Me? So I think also two women of color who also who are first gen, love seeing these platforms grow. So we just wanted to acknowledge them. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add before we like talk about films or anything like that.
No, I think we've kind of covered some of the ways that make well, one, I do think it's great. Just shout out to all the past nominees. We were just looking at the list earlier this morning and kind of like reminiscing and going through. And so it's really lovely to see previous nominees nominated again and for different forms of art, right? It's just
Yes.
complete, like that talent set is that's that's freaking amazing. Honestly, I was just
Yeah.
like that you can kind of, that's that's true like change making storytelling, to be able to like morph something, evolve something from one form to another. I'm always super impressed at that.
Okay, so people, we want to stress again, if you're looking for topics to write about, present on, Heather and I just giving you some gifts right now. So
Hmm.
happy holidays from us.
Yeah.
One more trend that we should talk about, which we
Hmm.
definitely see represented in the narrative film category, is the increase in representation of Asian Americans.
Yep.
So happy about that because the first gen Asian American story is very undertold in research and scholarship. But when we look at this year's nominees for narrative film, they include Raw Peace, which is based on a biography that came out a few years ago. But the movie Diddy, is focused on a young boy, Asian American boy, and his sister goes off to college, and it's so cute. I love it.
Yeah.
Bad Genius, which actually was based on another movie that came out several years ago, but the protagonist is also Asian American. And then The Boys in the Boat. So that's overlooked as well. One more thing I'll say about The Boys in the Boat, Heather, is
Mm.
that again, it's based on a true story,
Mhm.
but these are about all of the folks on the crew team who are white, by the way, came from rural areas, and they're at
Mhm.
the University of Washington. When would we ever
Yeah.
hear about the University of Washington? And it's the focus of the school, and it's the school that these young men. It is their Harvard. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? This is the school
Yeah.
that they really wanted to go to.
And also a sport that we usually only see as elite. Like, okay, so yeah, it's all white story, but like this is elite. Like we usually
Ooh.
see like rowing at Harvard or Yale, like whatever, right? Like
Yes.
those boys. This is different. This is like, and as again, I go back to like where our first gen start like we are at community colleges, we are at state schools,
State schools.
getting those incredible educations, being incredibly talented in sports and art and all of these things.
So right.
But the yacht stuff or the boating stuff is almost
Yes.
always super elite
Yes.
group, right? I mean, that's what I thought was really cool about this one is like that it these things aren't reserved for like the elite. I was thinking about this the other day, like Mount Everest or something, climbing Mount Everest. But I was reading about climbing Mount Everest because a friend and I use it as a metaphor for transfer sometimes of like, what are the challenges to climbing Mount Everest? Because only 33% of people who climb Mount Everest are actually successful doing it. Or sorry, it's like 16%. And with transfer it's the same, who transfer from community college, right? So it's like we use that as an example, but I was looking into the history and it was like, yeah, but it's all wealthy, right, white men who are doing it, because it's like yachts or like boating, it's reserved for this group. So I think that was a really unique aspect to that movie.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the high level overview. What else do you want to talk about?
Well, I'm kind of interested. I mean, we've gone through sort of these gaps and trends and these areas that you can kind of look at a little bit. But I really want to know what are the kind of tips or advice you would give to aspiring storytellers and authors and publishers and producers and influencers who want to be Catalyst nominees in the future. Like, what is your take on that?
It's gonna sound so cliche and obvious, but number one, you really have to be true to yourself and find out, like, as a storyteller, what is unique about you, and also remember that that is enough, and not imitate another sort of uh uh like writer or creator or what have you. So I'll just use like Alejandra Campbell as an example, last year's winner for first gen memoir, because it's so her. Like, if you meet Alejandra, her memoir really reflects her. We don't need a whole other series of memoirs that are just like that. So for example, Alejandra talks about like these pillars to the first gen experience. That's something that she came up with. We don't need like 20 more pillars about the first gen identity. Let Alejandra, like, do her thing. And when it comes to sharing your own story, really sort of tap into it's the interior work that has to happen first, is really what's unique to you as someone who's just completed a memoir.
Mm,
This is really fresh for me too. Like, what are the things that are true to me, and really, really lean into that. And like I said, trust that that's enough. Um,
hmm
what else would I say? Aspiring storytellers, remember that you're not alone. That, like, make sure that you're still in community with others as you're building and creating and getting feedback.
And if
Um,
you're looking for that community, like
mhm.
reach out, because LT and I talk about this all the time. That's why My Tribe Media actually exists, is like finding your tribe. Like, who else is doing this? Like, I
Yes.
don't, I'm not, you're not alone in it, I promise you.
Mhm.
And there are other people that are asking questions and learning from it. So connect with them, because I think that that can be one of the most helpful things. I think you talked about that a lot in your memoir writing experience, is just like
Yeah.
the people around it, you know, the community.
Well, even sort of tying us back to, like, previous nominees or previous winners, I think what we see about them, what they have in common is, like, a really strong identity. I think of
Mm-hmm.
the LMU, um podcast that won a few years ago,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
all student run, and, like, you just like, you could like, everything they did was really thoughtful and intentional, and you don't have to have a big budget. You had talked about this too, like, some of these mediums are, forms of media are much more accessible, and so
Yeah.
you don't, like, if even if you don't, it's not a matter of, like, all the editing skills and all
It
that.
doesn't have to sound perfect, doesn't have to look perfect.
Mm-mm.
I mean, dude, when I went into acting 30 years ago, this is like gonna like an old person story, but like you needed a camera as big as this couch, you needed another person, you needed like you just needed so much, and now you just need you and
Yeah.
your voice to do it. And so it doesn't it I don't I would encourage that too, is like don't let like circumstances be the hurdle, because sometimes circumstances are actually the thing that is so rich and unique about the experience, you know.
And then also to even make this more full circle is look at the examples we have from Gigi and from Yvette, who started off on one platform
Yeah.
and, it's just sort of on the ground and have moved over into like books now, right?
Yep.
So you never
Yep.
know, but just
Yeah.
you just get started. Just get
Are
started.
there well, on that front, are there other like forms of media that you think we should pay attention to? I mean, obviously I think of like TikTok and like other things that are happening, but are there areas that you are seeing emerge as um, either an area that no one's touched for this kind of thing,
It's a good
or hey, let's
question.
dive into this new form of art and how we can interweave, first gen stories?
That's a great question. What I would love to see, just what comes to mind immediately, is that I know that there are some schools that are producing like their own like student journals and student creative works.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I would
yeah.
love for the Catalyst Awards to like find a way to acknowledge those as well.
Yes, I was just thinking, because as
Mm.
a faculty member, I know you did this too. Like we've had our learning communities sometimes do like portfolios, or like they tell their and you're right, it would be so neat to see like a collection of what is the kind of what was the assignment, what was the thing, it'd be neat to have those nominated from a
Yeah.
really specific framework. I don't know. That seems, maybe that's really too specific, but
I
I
don't
could
know.
see that.
I
I
don't
could see
know.
that being
It
creative. Yeah.
yeah, I think, let me acknowledge, Illinois State because it and maybe we will give out a special awards this year because Illinois State created, a first gen specific tours, and they're recorded, and they have little video,
See,
and they're
that's
told
so cool.
exactly,
Oh my god, that's so
exactly,
cool. Because
exactly,
we know you all are doing these amazing things. I mean, think
mhm,
we could list off individually these you're such creative people doing such creative um student support like that. What a great way of spotlighting um and like almost addressing the questions, because we all know like you don't know the questions to ask, you don't even know what questions to ask sometimes, and so this gives you a little bit of that, right? It gives you like, okay, well, we're going to preemptively help that situation. Why do you have to, why do students have to sort of accidentally fall into the questions and the answers? Let's just know this is a thing, and record it and give this to you also through that first gen lens, because I'm assuming they probably have, this might be an assumption, but I'm assuming they have first gen students giving the tours.
yeah, so what it is, it's an audio tour.
Oh,
And
cool.
so, yeah, so like it's something you can download to your phone and you listen to the students say. So I'll give an example. Let's say their favorite place on campus was the library. So the first gen student would record themselves talking about the library at the library, so you hear the background, and then there's like an accompanying photo or video or something. It's so unique,
I love
so
that.
unique. Yeah, and
Oh, that would be really cool for nominee. Like, I would love to see that as a judge, to just something totally fresh and interesting like that. Wow, so cool.
okay, so one of the things that you are really big on talking about, Heather, is how people can use these things. Can you
Yes.
talk a little bit about that? So, okay, we've got these nominees, we've got 4 years of winners and all that. What what if what do
So many
people?
ways.
Okay, tell us.
There's so many ways. There's just so many cool ways we've seen folks utilize like the texts, the recordings, the memoirs, the books from the nominees. I mean, right off the bat, if you're somebody who's teaching or a professor, these can be things that you weave into your curriculum in some ways. Maybe if you're doing memoir work, you could have folks read some of um, the past nominees. But I think beyond that, it could inspire how your students tell their own stories or how your students create their own assignments and their own work in class. Or if you're looking for a good book for your book group, right? Like you're like, look, I got a local book group. Could we please, like, let's read the next 5 books. Let's have them be from these nominees. Or maybe you're looking for a speaker who could really tell kind of a unique story. You've got this list of folks who are storytellers. That's what they're doing. That's their whole that's their talent. And they're great speakers. They're great folks to come and talk to first gen students at your institutions or at your organizations or at your work or even just in your friend group. um Libraries can do great work with this, right? Yes, exactly. I've seen so many libraries do like a first gen day, and first gen week is in November. But it could be anytime. You could do it anytime, right? We did one whole thing on for Black History Month. It was like Black first gen authors for Black, and every week, you discuss a book at the library, and there's like a whole display that has kind of like interesting different stories and different highlighting and spotlighting different authors that you hadn't heard of. So these are the kind of things that we see folks doing all the time. Not only does it inspire your own thoughts on how to tell stories, it can inspire others. And then I would say, like, bigger and broader, if you're like a producer, if you're a media company, like, take a note of some of these things,
Yes.
right? Some of these
Yes.
themes. So I that's where I'd like to also see some of this go, of like, utilize these nominees and these amazing stories as inspiration for your next film project, for your next television series, for the next way that you're really deep diving into a unique point of view.
So two things come to mind for me. First, I want to give a shout out, as I always do, to the University of Missouri at Kansas City. Amazing, just forward thinking. Shout out to Megan and her crew. They
Mhm.
have a first gen space, but within that first gen space, they have a first gen library. So like a bookcase of, I
That's
know,
so cool.
do it, y'all, do it. And I know when I was at Loyola Marymount University, we partnered with our campus library to create a lib guide, which was a guide that had almost like an annotated bib of first gen text. So definitely
Mm.
look to your library for support. The other thing, so Heather, I'm just going to say this out loud so that we manifest this, but My Tribe Media really does need to host like a film festival or some kind of festival. I know, of
Yes.
filmmakers.
Like a
So we're not
first.
just looking, I mean, because many of the films that are nominated
Mm.
often are big budget ones, like Spider-Man has won
Spider-Man.
last year.
Blue Beetle, right.
Blue
Blue
Beetle.
Beetle.
This is last
I
year's winner.
Yeah,
Blue
yeah.
Beetle. Even the for the most part, the movies that are nominated this year as well, Boys in the Boat, for example, were still
Mhm.
directed by George Clooney,
George
still a big
Clooney.
budget movie. So I think I would like to see us also honor and celebrate new filmmakers, right? So we're
Yes.
just putting
Or
that
the
out there. New film.
documentaries, the other,
Yes.
yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep. And I bet there's short films out there. Maybe short films could
Yeah.
be a
A
new
short
category.
film. We're gonna make it happen,
Just
Heather.
putting it out there, everybody.
Well,
Hmm.
before we conclude, I will also acknowledge that uh, Dr. Martha Enciso and I have co-editors of an upcoming book about first gens in pop culture. Boop, boop, boop. Collection of essays
Mm,
from some amazing folks from all across the country, inside and outside of higher ed. And it is a practitioner's book. Actually, it is talking about how to use these things. So, for example,
mm,
let me talk about Matt Newland's amazing essay on Oppenheimer. And that was a huge film last year, but I think it's lost that the main character was a first gen to
Christian. Oh,
college.
100%.
Right. And so,
Yep.
number one, acknowledging, amplifying that experience. But then Matt talks about how to talk about the film. Okay, great first gen narrative. But then what does it mean to be first gen in STEM in particular, and how people could use
Mm,
this? Or I'll talk about the essay that I've contributed with my friend Katie, who will always be known to me as Katie Gaither. Sorry, Katie. I just your new married name just doesn't stick with me. Sorry, but but Katie and I talk about the movie, a previous Catalyst Award winner, Coda, which was about. Yes, I know. But in this case, we talk about first gens in the arts and
mm,
how that movie can be a tool or a resource for families, faculty, and staff who are supporting first gens who are interested in the arts, whether it's specifically at an art school or they just have artistic interests. Anyway, those are the types of essays that are in the book that will be coming out sometime late in 2025. So be on the lookout for that.
I
By
can't wait to read
Martha,
it.
by me, Martha and Cecil. All right, Heather, as we start to wrap up, anything else you want to say about Catalyst Awards? What are you excited about for this year?
Oh, well, one, just thank you to all the people who are putting all this amazing content and work and beautiful storytelling out there. I mean, it's always such a joy every year to kind of to get to indulge and like immerse myself in this. So I'm pretty lucky that I get to do that. So thank you, LT, for making this, manifesting this, to give the judges this opportunity. Um, but I'm, we're hearing from the authors and the nominees now. And so
We
just thank you
love
for your
it.
wonderful letters. We're just so excited for you. This was a really competitive year. I know if Stephanie were here, she would talk a lot about kind of some of the nuances of the deciding factors. So just congratulations to everyone, and thank you for the sweet notes back. I want also I want I'm going to put this out there. I want to come up with an award. Like I think we need a trophy.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
And
Let's-
so, yeah. So that's like 2025 what I'm thinking about. Like,
We're gonna make
what's
it
that
happen.
gonna look like? Yeah.
Yes, I love that. Please send us some
Yeah.
ideas about what would be.
Yeah.
So we have given like electronic certificates and things like
Mhm.
that, but we want to give something like a
The trophy.
physical. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
agree with that.
Yeah.
Um,
What about you,
I,
LT? Like, yeah, what are you looking forward
here's what
to?
I want. Something else I want to manifest, and then another note of gratitude. I in the past we've been able. Well, a couple like for 2 years in a row we were able to actually speak to nominees, and we weren't able to do that this year, but hopefully we will be once winners are announced in February. So winners are announced around February 15th. We will be able to go online and talk to the winners next year. So we just weren't able to talk to the nominees this time around, and I just want to thank you and all of our judges. We have 50 50 judges all over the country, y'all. And some are in higher ed, some are in nonprofit work, some are industry folks, and artists and creators themselves. And so we couldn't do this without the judges either. So I just want to make sure I thank the judges for literally volunteering their time. But I do know that people love it as well. So we'll be sure to keep it going. And if anyone listening wants to be a judge, just hit us up and let us know.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure to make it happen for next year. So look out for the announcement of the winners in February.
Woo! Yeah.
All
Happy New
right.
Year, everybody.
Thank
Woo!
you.
Bye.
Yay!